Not long ago, I decided to listen to a friend of mine about picking up some babysitting jobs from Craigslist. I know that seems weird, but I was surprised at how many postings for that type of work were on there. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have needed the job, but at the time, I had just broken up with my boyfriend, and I didn't think that I was going to be able to pay my rent. This seemed like the easiest way to make some money. It helps that I used to babysit when I was a teenager, and my brother has 2 small kids, so I felt like an expert in the field. After all, how hard could looking after some children for a few hours be? I set up a job for early Saturday evening, and I started messaging a woman named Chloe. The woman said that her and her husband would be leaving the house at around 5:15 p.m. and they would be back sometime after 10. She gave me the address and all the information about the children. I would be watching 2 boys, and one of the boys was 7 and the other was 9. I was figuring that this was going to be easy money. In my opinion, boys that age are easy to entertain, and because they weren't babies, they wouldn't need my undivided attention. After I talked to the lady, I told my friend about the job, who was jealous of the money that I was about to make. She had been doing the Craigslist babysitting jobs for a few months now and had never come close to the money I was about to make, or at least told that I was about to make. On Saturday evening, I made my way to the address given to me by Chloe, and right away, I had some regrets. The house was in a very sketchy neighborhood. Not necessarily crime-ridden, but it was a poor and run-down area. When I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I waited for several minutes and attempted several more knocks on the door when, finally, a strange and very rough-looking man answered the door. He was tall and skinny with this massive gray beard. I would say that he was at least in his 50s, unless he just looked rough for his age. And in this very low and gruff voice, he said, "Come on in, sweetheart. Sorry I didn't hear the knocks. My ears ain't what they used to be." I walked inside, and the first thing I noticed was how not child-friendly the house was. A lot of trash and just general clutter was lying about, and I was just standing in the front of the door, and the man then says, "My wife should be back any minute with the kids. Go and sit down and make yourself at home. Sorry, I know the place ain't the cleanest." I was trying not to be judgmental. I know it sounds like I should be running for the hills, but I didn't want to unfairly judge this guy or his family. And the man pointed down the hall and told me that the living room was in the back of the house. I made my way back there and sat on this bluish couch. The amount of anxiety I felt at this moment was absolutely crushing, though. I saw no pictures of children, no toys, and no indication whatsoever that children even lived there. While I was waiting on the couch, I could hear the man walking back and forth in the other room, and I think he was mumbling to himself. Every few minutes he would begin to shout, "Hey, sorry about this, ma'am. My wife can be forgetful with the time. I promise she'll be back soon." A few minutes later, he ran into the room scratching his head. With this big smile, he said, "You know what? I'm an idiot. I bet my wife came inside with the kids through the basement entrance. She's probably waiting for you down there. Nobody uses the front door that you came in, and the basement's right over there. Why don't you go check it out, and I'll meet you all down there in a minute." He stood there like some scarecrow, pointing to a door on the far side of the room. I didn't know what to do and just nodded and told him I would go check, and truthfully, I had enough at this point, though. He smiled and in this very unsettling voice says, "Well, that's great. I'll see you in a second, sweetie." And then he walked back into the front door. I opened the door to the basement out of curiosity, and it was obvious that nobody was down there. The lights were off, and the smell was just horrific when it hit my nose. There was no chance I was going to go down there. And while staring into the dark basement, I heard that he was still bumping around in the front room, and without thinking, I ran as fast as I could toward the front door that I came from. Once I hit it, the door was locked. I quickly unlocked it and ran for my car. As I opened the car door, I could hear him yelling from inside the house, but I didn't look back. I started backing down the driveway, and I could see him running out of the house, waving his hands back and forth. and thankfully by the time he reached the driveway, I was already flying down the road. I almost didn't call the police because technically I was physically fine and maybe even overreacting, but after calling my friend, she convinced me to call the authorities just in case. After the phone call, I had no idea what had happened. The dispatcher on the phone told me that they would take it from here and that was the end of it, at least on my end. Maybe there was a wife and kids. Maybe this was just a poor family that I just very unfairly judged. Maybe there really was an entrance to the basement that his wife used instead of that front door. But honestly, I'd rather look like some crazy jerk who judged the family than potentially be the victim of something very much worse. The unnerving nature of the situation told me to run, and I stand by that gut feeling. That very well could have been the best decision of my life.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
It was around the hottest month of summer when my old air conditioning stopped working all of a sudden. I got it checked by a repairer, and the guy told me that the damn thing was too old and was non-repairable, along with the lines that its part wasn't being sold any longer. I understood where he was coming from because it was a gift from my mom around 10 plus years ago when I moved out of the house. If I wanted to survive the heat, another air conditioner was a must, but there was a bit of financial condition I was going through, so buying a brand new one was out of the question. To get a cheap second-hand AC, I went to check on Craigslist, and after a thorough scan, I finally found one listed in the electronics section. I sent a few texts asking if it was available, and about 2 hours later, I finally received a reply saying it was. A woman called me for a few minutes later to text and introduce herself as Dr. Mary Elliott. She said I could give a visit in the evening if I wanted to look at it before buying, and the address she gave me was a well-known residential neighborhood. So I didn't think there would be a problem, or the thought of it being a fraud didn't even cross my mind. I gave her a call before heading out, informing her that I was on my way, and she responded with, "Give me a call once you're here." Even at that point, everything seemed normal to me, but as I called her after reaching the address, she didn't pick up the call. I called one more time, but again, no answer. Her number started to give an unavailable tone after the third try. So I decided to wait there for a bit longer before heading back, and as I was doing that, I was continually looking at the house to see if anyone would come out any moment. But when an hour passed by and her number was still turned off, nor did anyone approach me, I figured this was a prank or something. I decided to turn my car around and drive back, but as I was about to do that, there was a knock on the car's door. A man in his late 50s was standing there with a weird expression on his face. I figured him to be probably from the neighborhood, so I slid the door's mirror down and asked him what was wrong. "I've been watching you stand there for an hour, young man. Tell me what your business is here or I'm calling the cops on you." He threatened me, showing already dialed 911 on his phone, and all he needed to do was press the button. "I'm not up to anything shady, sir. I was here to buy an air conditioner from Dr. Elliott." I showed him the chat on Craigslist as proof that I was here for the AC, but the man's expression and response were rather unexpected than what I had imagined. "You're the third person this week to claim this. Whoever's put up that advertisement is fraud because it's been over 3 months since Dr. Elliott and her husband died in a car accident." This news came as a shocker, but he looked genuinely concerned while telling me this, so I believed him. I couldn't understand why anyone would try and impersonate someone dead. What did that person gain from doing so? It was not long after that I found out the reason behind this facade. As I was driving out of the neighborhood, I saw a woman signal me to stop the car, thinking her to be another resident of the neighborhood who was trying to know why a strange car was coming out of there. I pulled over to the side of the road, but before I could say or do anything, 3 armed men with huge builds jumped out of nowhere and pointed their guns at me. I was forced out of the car at gunpoint, and the moment I got out, they snatched my car keys from me. The woman was the one who got in the driver's seat, and the 3 men followed her to take the rest of the seats. I was not so brave to fight off armed robbers and risk getting shot, so watching them drive away with my car before calling 911. After reporting it to the police, I was told to wait there, and not long after, I was met with a cop car and 2 officers in there. They told me to hop in the back seat, and I did while giving them the information about my car and plate number, etc. I also described as they drove in the direction the car went about how these 4 looked. There was one black dude around 6'4" in height, and the other 2 were white, but their height must have been around 6 feet. The woman had short hair, looked Latina, and she had multiple tattoos on her arms and necks. Instead of doing a full car chase with the robbers, the 2 officers radioed it to the officers in the area, giving them the details of the car and those 4 people. After a few minutes, I was dropped at the police station by them to file a report, which I did, and since I had car insurance, I filed a claim on it as well. I didn't want the insurance money though, since I was hoping to get my car back, which I bought after saving for a long time, and there was also a sentimental issue with it, so I was not ready to let it go yet. A few weeks later, I got a call from the police, and they informed me that they found my car 2 states over. Someone had tried to register it at the DMV, and it came up as stolen, and when the cops contacted the man, he said a woman sold it to him for $1,300. The number she used to contact him was also fake, so we couldn't find her. Now the issue was that this man, let's just call him James, was also scammed just as I had been robbed by that woman, so he refused to give me my car back, saying he bought it fair and square. The man suggested that I let him have the car and get the insurance money instead, but I was just as selfish as the other person, and since he couldn't register the car as it was stolen goods, I decided not to be the lifetime victim. So eventually, with the help of the cops, I got my car back, and James filed a report against the woman for a scam. I still sometimes wonder if I did the right thing by not letting him have my car, but again, none of it was my fault either, since I was a victim of robbery myself. At the end of the day, I learned my lesson: to never trust a stranger on the road to stop your car for them, and never to deal on sites like Craigslist anymore.
I'm not sure how to start. I suppose I should explain how I got here. It's not a thing I ever saw myself doing. I'm not a highly trained super soldier drawn to combat or a tough guy in any way. Until then, I'd only fired a gun a few times, taking pot shots at cans and the like. My interests focused mainly on comics and video games like most guys my age. In high school, I was in the chess club and still play a lot online. When I began college, I caught the coding bug, and that is what I focused on. I graduated with a degree and got a job with a small game developer. The job's been fun, and my coworkers are really cool and smart people, a lot smarter than me, in truth. Now, up until 2020, I had lived on my own for a few years. Unfortunately, that year was a perfect storm of misfortune for my family and the world at large. In addition to the pandemic, my mother made the difficult decision to divorce my stepfather. She had finally grown tired of enough of his verbal and physical abuse to kick him out. She was now responsible for providing for herself and my 12-year-old brother on one income. In spite of the odds, she was making it. Then the lockdowns began and she lost her job. This was a disaster. As soon as I found out, I moved out of my place and in with them. I quickly sold what I could and put the rest of my belongings in storage. There was no way I was going to let my family get turned out onto the streets, and certainly not while a deadly plague was ravaging the planet. The lockdowns were a mixed bag for us. My job was unaffected for the most part. All work switched off-site. The extra money I saved was put into food and other bills. My mother, who had always been very interested in vintage clothing, began reselling them on Etsy and eBay. At least on the financial front, we were eking out an existence. The good always comes with the bad, and my stepfather was nothing but bad. I had encouraged my mother to file a restraining order against him as a just-in-case measure after kicking him out, but instead, he still will be allowed to see his son. I considered other options, but it didn't seem fair cutting my little brother off from his dad. So as long as he played nice, I would mind my own business and avoid him when he came around. Fortunately, the lockdowns came to an end and we were allowed to restart our lives. I began working out of the office again and my brother returned to school. Mom quickly found a part-time job tending bar downtown. It was not an ideal situation, but a start at the least. My stepfather had to screw it up, though. He discovered where Mom was working and began frequenting her workplace. Mom had more than enough experience dealing with his crap and took his provocations on the chin. As usual, he got too drunk and pushed things too far. The night he threw a full glass of beer in my mom's face, the bouncers threw him out in his butt. I wish I could say that he learned his lesson, but bullies are often slow in the uptake. I couldn't deal with the humiliation, so he waited outside of our apartment, continuing to drink all the while. He sprang from the bushes and beat my mom mercilessly until she was able to escape into the safety of the apartment. I just happened to be away that night working on a last-minute deadline. Had I been there to witness it, what came later may have happened a lot sooner than it did. I arrived late the next afternoon, so exhausted that I could barely see, but the second I saw my mom's face, I exploded. I'd had enough. If the cops didn't do their jobs, I would do it for them. I think Mom could see how serious I was, and it scared her. I believe she came up with her plan not to stop the abuse, but to prevent me from ruining my life because of it. I was in the process of calling the cops when she asked me to hear her out. I was reluctant, but did so. No matter what she said, I still had every intent of making that call. She reminded me that the police had been involved many times before, but whether because of her reluctance to testify or just plain systemic disinterest, he had gotten off with little more than a slap on the wrist. Rather than call authorities, she proposed that we move somewhere that he was less likely to bother us. The lockdowns had put an end to any real reason for us to stay. Her original employer, along with many other employers in the area, had been destroyed. The school district, which had never been very good, was now in a shamble, and there was nothing keeping us there. I thought about it, and now that I'd calmed down somewhat, agreed that it sounded good. I may have had the most to lose, but I figured that I could probably work remotely. If not, I was sure that I'd be able to find a job using my skills wherever we ended up. And so the preparations began. That evening, we packed everything up that we could into their cars, and while we did so, I noticed Mom putting her dad's old Smith & Wesson revolver in her purse. I gave her a questioning look, but she quickly closed the purse and continued with the packing, and I kept my feelings to myself. The following morning, we rose up early and hit the road. We hadn't informed anyone that we were leaving, not even the apartment manager. Anyone who needed to know could be informed after we arrived at our new home, and even they wouldn't be informed of where. We convoyed for most of the day, only stopping for a quick lunch. About 6 p.m., we decided to grab a room for the night. I made an order for some pizzas. We'd been done eating about a half an hour when Mom got a text from my stepfather. I watched Mom turn dead pale as she read it. She just stared at the screen with her mouth gaping open. I grabbed the phone from her and read the message out loud. "Did you actually think I'd let you run away with my son that easy?" My brother and I stared at one another in astonishment. We both jumped up and ran to the window. I yanked the curtain back hard and scanned the parking lot for him. It was the worst thing that I could have done. He saw me first and began running toward the room. I yanked the curtains closed, but it was already too late. We couldn't do anything but stare at each other in dread as we waited for him to arrive. The silence in the room was terrifying. Outside, the sound of running grew closer by the second. A nauseating churning stirred in my guts, and I would liken it to waiting for a bomb to land and blow you to bits. I fought off the overpowering desire to vomit. Gradually, the clomping of his boots became a deafened pounding until nothing. For a brief moment, we started to believe that we had been somehow saved. Mom crept toward the door and carefully peeked through the peephole and just as quickly jumped back from it. Suddenly, the door exploded open and off its hinges. My brother and I turned and ran, but it was too late for my mom. She had become trapped under the door, putting her well in reach of my stepfather. He effortlessly snatched her up by her shirt and began punching her in the face as hard as possible. Each hit slung Mom's body back like a rag doll. My brother stood nearby helplessly begging his father to stop. I too could only watch as he pounded the life from her. There was little I could do. He was so much larger than me, massive and strongly built by years of hard manual labor, and I was left with only one option. The one that I had often threatened in anger but never imagined I'd ever have to choose. Yet I had little choice. He clearly intended to kill her, and if I was going to do something, it must be done immediately. Once I decided, the act was almost mechanical. I marched over to Mom's purse and pulled the pistol from it. I felt like that I was in a dream. It would be as simple as shooting a few cans. I pulled the trigger in 3 quick motions. The gun's sound deafened me and a ringing drowned out my ears. My stepfather stumbled back a moment and then glared at me with the most amazed and shocked face. It's the craziest thing. I'm still completely bewildered when I look back at it. I think he honestly believed that he was going to be able to murder my mom and take my brother with him and get away with it. It's insane, but I truly believe he thought that. I was about to pull the trigger a few more times, but he stumbled around and collapsed just outside the threshold of the door. I carefully stepped around my brother, who was in a heap on the floor, sobbing. I nudged my stepdad's body with my foot and didn't get a reaction. I looked over to my mom, who was unconscious on the floor. Her face was so bad, and I was sure that she was dead. I stuck the pistol in my front pocket and ran back around to where my phone was charging. I unplugged it and called 911. Just to be safe, I placed the pistol back in Mom's purse to make sure the cops didn't shoot me by accident. And while I waited, I checked Mom for a pulse and was happy to find that she was still alive. Help soon arrived and rushed her off to a hospital. Considering the circumstances, I had to stay behind with the police. I told them what had happened and the history we had with the subject, and they repeated the same questions over and over, I guess to see if I changed my story. And they must have been satisfied because they let me leave for the hospital a few hours later. I was instructed not to leave the city until I was formally cleared, which was fine with me. A reason for running had been dealt with after all. They did take the gun as evidence, of course, and this bothered me a little because it had been my grandfather's service weapon when he was a sheriff, and I assumed that we'd never get it back. In the end, if this was to be the price for security and peace, it was well worth paying. When I arrived at the hospital, Mom was in surgery. The doctor's preliminary diagnosis was grim. Her face and skull had been fractured along with her brain almost certainly being enlarged due to swelling. There was also some concern that she may lose sight in one of her eyes. Despite the bad news, I was relieved that she had survived the attack, and the rest was in God's hands now. I joined my brother in the waiting room. He had to have been in shock. The last few hours had been an emotional roller coaster. Most adults live an entire life not having experienced as much as he had in such a short time. I sat and watched him for a couple of minutes. He stared at the TV keenly as if his life depended on it, and I broke the silence with an apology. I wasn't sorry for what I'd done, but I still felt bad for having to do it in his presence. He turned to me and thought deeply for a long moment before speaking. "It's okay. He was an a-hole and he got what he had coming to him. I loved him, but he was a monster. Don't feel bad. Mom's alive because of you." I was shocked by his reply, to be honest. He was a very quiet kid, and I never heard him voice those type of feelings before, and I was at a loss for words, so I gave him a big hug and let it go at that. Mom came out of surgery a few hours later, and we were soon allowed to see her. I had tried to prepare myself mentally for what I may see, but I was shocked nonetheless. Her head was almost twice its size and wrapped completely, but for a few narrow tubes exiting it. I maintained my composure, but my brother was a different story. He was a blubbering mess, and I don't blame him. It was not a sight anyone his age should have to see, especially when it was his own mother. The next week was a long period of watching and waiting. The hospital was cool enough to let us crash in the room. I had also gotten us a new motel room so we could clean up or sleep in a real bed occasionally. Gradually, Mom's condition would improve, and she even managed to keep vision in her damaged eye. Nearly a month later, she was finally released. It was a day I had feared may never come, and I was very emotional when it arrived. Meanwhile, as Mom recuperated, the investigation continued. A few days before her release, I had found us all a small house to rent in town. It was beginning to look, at least for the time being, that this was to be our new home. It was a happy relief when the call finally came. After an exhaustive investigation, authorities had deemed my shooting to be justifiable, and I was a free man in the eyes of the law. The call came just 15 days ago, and I'm still somewhat shaken. I'm afraid something's going to happen to ruin our new life. Mom is improving by leaps and bounds every day. I've been able to keep my job working remotely, and my brother's continually proving to be an amazingly resilient individual. There is a small cloud looming off in the distance. Our lawyer has indicated that my stepfather's family has made threats of filing a civil lawsuit against me. He seems to think it's all talk, and I can't imagine them coming up with the resources needed to mount such a long and pointless undertaking. They are all a bunch of aimless poor alcoholics and addicts that can't even be bothered to hold down a job, and I remain optimistic considering my adversaries. I can't think of any more to include. The situation appears to be stable, and I think the biggest of our troubles has passed. Our new home is a warm and inviting place full of kind people. I wish every place was this nice. Mom has every intention of going back to work soon, and my brother has already started at his new school. It seems that after all the years my family has suffered, we may finally have come out the other side of the tunnel. The future should be bright from here on. My only regret is that a boy had to lose his father forever to get there, and that I had to be the one who caused it.
I'm a French student doing a master's in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I live alone in apartments in a building where there are only students. I'm 22, enjoying life peacefully. To give you a bit of context, I live in a calm, good neighborhood. The only noises I had here are the tram or parties in the building since a lot of students are there. One night around 10 p.m., I hear a knock on my door. I live on the 3rd floor, and to get to my front door, you have to open the main door, which needs a key. Then you need to open the door to my corridor with the same key. So people who want to come to my door must have the key, call me, or ring at the door so I could open the door for them from my apartment. Nothing of this happened. I just hear a knock at my door. I usually open the door without a second thought, whether it's my landlord or a neighbor asking for something. As he told you, I feel pretty safe in the building, and I could also take care and defend myself in case anything happens. But this time, for some reason, I had a bad feeling about this. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave. I finished my assignments. However, the knocking continued for 30 seconds. I said, "Yeah," in English. The person knocking doesn't say anything. I say in English again, "Who is it?" The voice answers in English. It's Uber Eats, which is weird because Dutch always speak in Dutch, and I recognize the voices and accents of everyone on my floor who have the key to access the floor. So it wasn't a neighbor, it wasn't my landlord, it was someone claiming to come from Uber Eats. But the issue is, I didn't order anything from Uber Eats that day. The voice was unfamiliar. In case it's a prank or a neighbor pulling a joke, it was also a deep voice, at least 40 and probably a smoker. I replied that I didn't order anything, you must have it wrong. After a few seconds, the knocking continues and the same voice says, "Pretty sure you did have an order under your name." I start panicking. I look around and pick up a knife in case he breaks the door because the knocking was getting a bit louder. I checked if my door was locked. It wasn't. I was literally 10 centimeters away from him. My front door was the only thing keeping him from me, and I'm glad it doesn't open from the outside. He needed a key to open it even if it's not locked. I stepped again and asked, "What's the name?" He seems to be thinking for a few seconds when a final knock occurs. It was loud and it translated some anger, frustration. Finally, I hear him going down the emergency stairs right next to my apartment. The steps were heavy and the person was clearly in a hurry. I don't know what he wanted or what would have happened to me if I'd opened the door as I usually do. I still haven't understood how he got through the 2 doors. And why did he come specifically to the last apartment on the 3rd floor? Did he try others before I posted the post about it on the WhatsApp group we have in the building? No one saw anything suspicious, so no one opened the door for anyone. Either way, I'm lucky for my instinct telling me not to open the door, and I'm glad I listened.